So we don't teach our children anything.
Hands-on stuff to teach him these things, not just reading out of a book, which is what's wrong with public school.
So it's true. My son cannot read. It will come at the right time.
I'm supposed to know this! I'm supposed to know this already! Ah!
Did you know that 54% of American adults can only read at or below a 6th grade level? For reference, some 6th grade books are Holes, A Wrinkle in Time, and the Percy Jackson series. And those are all great children's books, but imagine not being able to read anything beyond them. Worse, imagine being an adult who struggled to understand written words at all, who was functionally illiterate. You wouldn't be able to fill out a job application, follow a recipe, you might not even be able to sign your own name. Wouldn't you do everything in your power to prevent this from happening to your child? Well, not these parents. Recently, my YouTube homepage has been filled with reactions to parents who unschool their kids on TikTok. And this means that they pull their children out of public school, but instead of setting up a homeschooling curriculum, they let the child decide what they're going to learn and when. Doesn't matter what it is, if the child doesn't want to learn it, they don't. I had heard the term unschooling before, but I've never seen it in action. And once the initial shock of these videos wore off, I became horrified, thinking what future awaits these children if they never learn how to read. So today I want to talk about unschooling, literacy, and the effects of illiteracy on a person's life. And I'm focusing on literacy not only because this is a books and reading channel, but because these parents, by and large, don't seem to have any training in education or in child development, and therefore don't seem to understand just how critical it is for a child to learn to read. Because it is relevant, quick background on me. Though I'm not an educator now, I did study education alongside literature at the undergrad and graduate levels, and I used to work as an assistant in a remedial reading classroom in an elementary school, so I do have a pretty solid understanding of this topic. In order to better understand this situation, we need to define a few terms: unschooling and literacy. Let's start with unschooling. Unschooling is a form of homeschooling popularized by the education critic John Holt in the 1970s. Holt began his career as an elementary school teacher, but when he noticed that the school system focused on repetition and memorization over critical thinking and true understanding, he became disillusioned with formal education and began advocating for homeschooling. Holt initially believed he could help reform the school system, but the less progress he saw, the more radical his views became, so he came to advocate not only for homeschooling, but a hands-off, child-led approach to homeschooling. He believed, quote, "Children who were provided with a rich and stimulating learning environment would learn what they are ready to learn when they are ready to learn it." This approach would come to be called unschooling when Holt's newsletter, Grow Without Schooling, launched in 1977. It's worth noting that Holt did not have a degree in education or psychology, but rather studied industrial engineering at Yale. From what I can tell, his views about how children learn don't seem to be based in anything other than his own belief system and some observations from his time as a teacher. So you might be wondering, like I was, how a curriculum-free education is even legal? Well, in the US, homeschooling is perfectly legal in all 50 states, and because unschooling is technically a form of homeschooling, there are no laws against it. However, each state differs in how much proof of teaching hours and progress they require. New York, for example, is on the stricter end. The state requires an individualized home instruction plan prior to every school year, and then quarterly and annual reports on the actual progress that was made. Idaho, on the other hand, does not regulate or monitor homeschool education. Ah, Idaho, a neglectful parent's paradise. And now that we have a background on unschooling, what do we mean by illiteracy? I brought up the 54% statistic a minute ago, but who are the people who fall into this 54%, and what do their reading skills actually look like? The statistic comes from a recent study from the US Department of Education, who found that 54% of US adults aged 16 to 74, or approximately 130 million people, lack literacy proficiency. Well, that raises the question of what is literacy proficiency. Literacy is broadly defined as the ability to read and write, but it more accurately encompasses the comprehension, evaluation, and utilization of information. In other words, illiteracy is not only a total lack of reading and writing ability, but also a decreased ability to understand and use information. In fact, the Program for International Assessment of Adult Competencies, say that 5 times fast, identifies 5 levels of literacy, with 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. They found that 1 in 5 US adults fall into level 1, meaning they struggle to read and understand print materials, though some on the higher end could be able to perform simple tasks based on the info presented to them. Those at level 2 can perform slightly more advanced tasks, like paraphrasing and comparing and contrasting, but aren't able to do so with longer or denser texts. We'll come back to these categories and definitions in a few minutes during the reaction portion of the video, but I want to highlight a quote from Dr. Iris Feinberg, who's the director of the Adult Literacy Research Center at Georgia State University. It's not just people who are poor, it's not just people who are racial minorities, it's not just people who speak funny because they're from the South. It literally can be anybody. So I'm not someone to throw around the word privilege because it's kind of become devoid of meaning these days. But in this case, it does take a certain amount of privilege and financial stability in order for one or both parents to stay home and homeschool or unschool a child rather than work outside the home. As we'll see, there seems to be this unspoken belief among unschooling parents that illiteracy can't possibly happen to their child, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Reading and writing are not natural, inherent human skills. They need to be taught. And if a child is not taught to read, they will be illiterate no matter their race or their class. Okay, you waited long enough for the reaction portion of this video. Let's start with the unschooling TikTok that set the internet aflame by a creator called Mommy Onami. There's a lot going on in this video that I want to address, so we're gonna break it down in sections.
So we don't teach our children anything. Everything that they learn is in response to either their interests or their questions. We have no curriculum, we have no school hours. We really just respond whenever they want to know something and do our best to make sure they really get it. And my big fear about free schooling was that if my kids only went towards what they were interested in, saving all of their real estate only for things they're interested in, not cramming it with anything necessary, I was concerned that they would never be interested in things like reading and writing and math.
So I'm immediately noticing some contradictions that I doubt this mother is aware of herself. She says she wants to save all of her son's brain space for the things that he's interested in, none of that necessary stuff. Which, like, how do you put scare quotes around necessary, but then expresses fear that he won't be interested in reading, writing, and math? So she must understand then that reading, writing, and math are necessary skills, but is also admitting that if her son does not express interest in them, she will not teach them. Like, I just can't imagine being a parent and having this kind of cognitive dissonance, like knowing your son needs to learn these essential skills and yet refusing to teach them if he doesn't express this like outright enthusiasm. It just, like, how do you really believe that that is the best thing for your child? Not to mention, often as adults, we have to do things we are not interested in and don't want to do. I, for one, am not interested in math or finances, but I'm certainly glad I was taught enough of both of those things to, you know, have a budget and do my taxes, or else I would be in some deep trouble. Now let's talk about that writing.
My son's 6, and it took some patience and not comparing myself to other moms, but this is his book. Look at this. Lamp. Egg. Jar. Lion. This is him doing this by himself, copying down words from other places, asking us more. Same with addition. Mom, what's 7 plus 5?
This lady seems very impressed that her son wrote egg and lamp on his own, but at 6 years old, that's not impressive. This reminded me a lot of the children I worked with when I was a remedial reading assistant. You know, the handwriting looks very similar in that it's nearly illegible, and it's not, staying on a straight line. In fact, in the classroom I was in, some students would come in every day, others would come in 2 or 3 times a week, depending on their needs, and this strikes me as an everyday student. And notice how she says he's copying down words. Copying is not writing. And of course, copying down letters is part of how you learn to write. But just because he can draw the letters that make up a word doesn't necessarily mean he understands how the language is working and that he'd be able to identify these words on his own. Like I could copy down words in Russian, does not mean I understand Russian. And the same thing goes for the addition she mentioned. Telling your kid that 7 + 5 = 12 is not the same thing as teaching him how addition works so that he could get to that answer himself. Finally, let's look at her closing statement.
It will come at the right time. But if you do not like this idea of sending your kids away for 40 hours a week and then wondering why they have no energy to do anything else, if you are not into your kids conforming, trust that you can follow their interests and they will learn everything they need to learn, not what other people need them to learn.
Her small amount of anecdotal evidence that it will come at the right time is not nearly strong enough to assert that if you pull your kids out of school, they will learn everything they need to know. And what I'd really love to know is what exactly does she mean by not into your kids conforming and what other people need them to learn? She's already admitted that reading, writing, and math are necessary skills. So, what does she think is taught in public schools? That is so horrible. She already listed all the important things, the main things other than history. Maybe that's the horrible thing. I truly don't have an answer. And as we'll see with the rest of these videos, it seems like the very idea that their child might ever encounter a rule or ever be anything less than entertained is what's so offensive. But real quick, if you found this video interesting so far, albeit infuriating, do consider hitting that subscribe button. I'm Kelsey Jo, this is Thought Couture, where the life of the mind is down to earth. And I publish videos almost every week on book recommendations, creative writing advice, and literary commentary like this. Okay, now let's meet our next TikTok famous unschooling mom, Kelsey Ray. I have quite a bit to say about her. First of all, as a Kelsey, on behalf of all the other Kelseys of the world, we do not claim her.
We have 52 days until I pull my child out of public school and start unschooling him. He will be in 2nd grade. But I want to share some things with you guys that I'm going to be doing to make sure that I don't fuck up his education or fuck up his future. Some of you guys in my comments, not all of you, most people in my comments actually are homeschooling or unschooling. And I love that. We built this community of people, this community of women that really just think the same. And I fucking love that. That's been my goal this entire time with this platform is can we create a community of people that all think the same? And we've done that. So tell me in the comments if you homeschool or unschool, what are your best practices, your best tips?
So right off the bat, she says, make sure I don't fuck up his education or his future. Failed. You failed. You failed at that. I'm also immediately concerned with the language she's using to describe her community. People, women who all think the same, that's been my goal. Cult. You just described a cult, my friend. First off, notice how she specifies women. That strikes me as a subtle way of striking down any potential opposition by appealing to the women supporting women idea. I'm willing to bet that if any of her followers or community members dared call her out, she'd respond with, oh, you're mom shaming, you're not a girl's girl, blah, blah, blah. More importantly, I have no doubt that this mindset extends to her children. She wants to surround herself with people who all think the same. Well, what place makes it very easy to meet people who don't think like you? Public school. It's pretty clear, I think, that this desire for conformity and pulling her son out of a place of diversity are related. Although this pro-conformity attitude is an interesting point of departure from the previous video. So what are Kelsey's big plans for unschooling? Let's listen.
So a couple of things that I'm going to be doing are prioritizing to make sure that I don't fuck up his education and he learns the skills he needs to be a successful adult is lots of time outside. This is going to allow his creativity to flow, letting children be children and not setting them in front of a fucking desk or a piece of paper or a book for 8 hours a day is the best way to get their creativity flowing. And that matters in life, especially when you're trying to do something that you love. I'm going to take him grocery shopping. We're going to start a garden, doing lots of gardening, lots of hands-on stuff to teach him these things, not just reading out of a fucking book, which is what's wrong with public school. So I'm going to also teach him about money. That goes into grocery shopping, okay? I'm going to teach him how to be frugal, teach him how to shop for the things that he needs, not always what he wants. I'm going to teach him how to set boundaries with people. I'm going to teach him how to create friendships and connections with people. I'm going to teach him how to bake and cook. Do you know how many adults there are right now that 30, 40 years old don't know how to fucking cook, which is crazy to me, okay? After a certain point, you can't blame your parents for that shit no more. You can learn, all right? We're also going to be doing lots of sports. So he'll be in any sport, every sport that we can possibly think of, because we will now have time to do so. I'll be taking them to the aquarium and zoos and learning through life experiences. And that is what unschooling is.
So we have time outside, creativity, grocery shopping, gardening, cooking, money, sports, all things you can teach your kids outside of school and things you should do with your kids. Those are all great things. You know, I'm totally in support of hands-on experiential learning and fostering a child's creativity. There's no problem there with me, but schooling and creativity are not mutually exclusive. Nor is it true that kids in school sit at a desk for a full 8 hours a day. Recess exists, gym class, art class, music class, theater programs, field trips, clubs, sports teams, all sorts of special programs. Like, they already exist in school. Now, it takes a lot for me to feel offended, but I'm starting to feel a little offended by the fact that she's offended by the very concept of a book. We're not just going to sit in front of a fucking book. Again, like, I agree that not every student learns best by reading and that book learning is only one way to learn, but at this age, kids absolutely need to be exposed to books and reading. Remember those literacy levels I mentioned a little bit ago? Well, because her son did attend kindergarten and first grade, maybe he's on track with reading for his age. I don't really know, she doesn't say, but he still needs to work on skills like comprehension, grammar and vocab, paraphrasing, context clues, synthesizing ideas, and not to mention also learning to express his own thoughts and ideas in writing. And he just can't learn that while at the grocery store, or gardening, or playing baseball. I also can't help but think and suspect that this aversion to reading is related to the previous point of conformity of thought. Aside from school, where else can you access ideas that differ from those of the people around you? Books. It's just so sad and alarming to see just how much this mother is isolating her child. And, you know, she says she wants to foster creativity and freedom, but is also stifling her child's ability to express himself and use his imagination through language. This next thought is not like fully formed, but I do think there's this overarching anti-intellectualism among these TikTok unschooling moms that I don't quite understand. And like, anti-intellectualism in our current society is like a big topic I'm thinking about a lot and like really trying to get to the root of. But I do know that it is not benefiting these children at all. We have about another minute of Kelsey Ray, and her closing thoughts are something.
Now, a lot of people think that unschooling, and people will say, unschooling is giving your child autonomy over what they want to learn. And yes, that is true. But if you sit there and say, what do you want to learn today? And your kid goes, I don't really want to learn today. It's not your job to say, okay, that's fine. No, we're learning something today, but what do you want to learn first? Okay, that's how I'm approaching it. I'm not going to give my child full autonomy over dictating his entire education or his entire, like, little baby life, because if he chose, he would choose to do nothing, okay? But I will have lots of stuff planned out for us to do, physically, hands-on stuff, and I believe this is going to be the best thing I've probably ever done for my kids, and I'm really excited. I'm going to record everything, so if you're not following me, you definitely should be, because I am documenting the fuck out of this experience, because I have been feeling in my heart for a very long time that public school is just not, it's just not it. It's just not. And I think that a lot of you watching this, you probably feel the same way. So I'll take the lead. I'll do this. I will lead you on this. Even though I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, I know that I'm gonna figure it out. And I trust my instincts and what I feel is best for my child over anything else that the government or society has to say about it. So make sure you tap that follow button and follow me if you relate to this.
I guess I'm glad that she's not going to let her son learn nothing, which is the absolute bare minimum. But again, I'm seeing this cognitive dissonance and these contradictions. So you know your child would choose to learn nothing if given the option. So then you pull him out of an environment of structure and put him into a space, a movement that is focused on the child's desires. You admit you don't know what you're doing, but also think you know better than the government and every educator that has studied teaching and has been teaching for centuries. Now, remember when I said cult? You just described a cult. Well, I wasn't joking, because I went to Miss Kelsey Ray's page, noticed she has an alarming number of followers, got nosy, clicked her link, and she's in a pyramid scheme. Are you shocked? Aren't you just so shocked? It's Prove It specifically, which sells like ketones for weight loss or something. If you want to go down like the whole rabbit hole of MLMs and specifically Prove It, wild. Unbelievable. I know I said I'm focusing on literacy, but I think it would be irresponsible not to mention that I do believe Kelsey Ray is grooming her children into becoming her downline and is using unschooling like as a cover. I also want to note here that just because certain tenets of unschooling are fine, they're sound, specifically focusing on like experiential learning and fostering creativity, unschooling's lack of structure and the lack of regulation and monitoring on the government's part lets people like her get away with something like that. Finally, we're going to go back to Mommy Onami for just a minute because she says something very interesting that I need to address. Quick side note, there are other unschooling parents on TikTok, but these two are far and away the most prominent, and therefore I think the most dangerous, which is why I'm focusing on them. I'm going to play this one all the way through, and I want you to notice the language she's using and the dichotomy she's setting up.
So it's true. My son cannot read at age 6. There's never going to be a time in my life where I can say, yeah, my son started reading when he was 5 years old. He's on the Waldorf and Montessori schedule. It's different. But here's the thing about my kid. He's free. He's always been free. And every single day of his life is a blank canvas that he can make whatever art he wants with. Discovery, adventure, art, play, interest. This is what his day is made up of. There's no conformity. There's no needing to pretend that you're sick in order to get a day off. There's no trends. There's no ahead or behind. There's just being free, exactly the way that you are, free to learn at your own pace. And there are so many inmates that will know so much more than me. Inmates get law degrees, get all kinds of stuff. And there's so many inmates that will say, look, this is just the way that it is. This has been a really good thing for me. Everybody else is doing it. We don't live in a creative world. This is just what it is. But would any of those inmates not trade in all of these things they've gotten used to for a chance at being free, for a chance to feel the sun on their face every single day? That's what all of this is about. Thank you.
So she finally says her son cannot read. We knew that, but thanks, I guess, for admitting it. First off, I have a little bone to pick with the statement he's on the Waldorf and Montessori reading schedule. Full disclosure, I did graduate from a Waldorf school. I was not there for the elementary school years, but I do know that, yes, their reading teaching schedule is a little bit later than public school. They usually start teaching, I believe, around 7 instead of 5 or 6. But they do have a formal reading education. The students are taught to read. They are not just sitting around waiting for it to happen. Montessori schools, on the other hand, at least according to my research, usually start even earlier than public schools, around 4 or 5. I point this out because the attempt to piggyback off of other education systems incorrectly as a means of legitimizing her decisions once again points to this cognitive dissonance. She knows deep down, probably very deep down, that her son should be reading, but she's refusing to put his needs over her own beliefs. Now, what I really want to focus on is her use of the word free. No, her son cannot read, but he's free to turn every day into a work of art, and all of us who went to school and conform to the demands of society are the inmates. I know someone who would wholeheartedly disagree with this statement, and you may know him too, Oliver James.
A TikTok star is documenting his journey of teaching himself to read and inspiring the entire internet in the process.
On TikTok, Oliver James is a personal trainer, aspiring motivational speaker.
I'm here to motivate you.
And an open book.
I struggle with reading,
especially when it comes to books.
34-year-old Oliver James went viral on TikTok in 2022 when he confessed to the internet that he could not read, and he started sharing his journey to literacy. At the time, Oliver was functionally illiterate, meaning he had some basic reading and writing skills, but couldn't manage daily tasks that required much reading. He has several videos on his page talking about things that were difficult for him before he could read, so I'm going to play some clips here.
So y'all know I'm teaching myself to read, and I used to get a lot of anxiety going out to eat because I didn't know how to read menus. I would just get familiar foods if I have to.
So we at the grocery store, had to get some vegetable broth. Now, one of the cool things about learning to read is these aisle things up here now, you know, like these things right there, right? Them joints right there, right? So you look up at those and it'll tell you exactly like where the products are in the aisles. That's something I didn't know. So I'm here at the library right now. I have to go in here to try to get some documents read to me because I don't know how to read them. I need something read to me. Is it possible I can give you like something to read to me?
Oliver James says he never learned how to read as a child and spent his entire adult life finding ways to hide that. Every situation needed a strategy, from job applications.
I got bad eyes. Can you help me fill this out? Pay him 20 bucks. Like, you find ways.
A fast food menu.
So if you went in before me and you're like, can I get a number 1 with no ketchup? Then I would order that way.
Even dating.
My friends used to text for me. When I remember that. That was hard.
So we have ordering familiar foods or ordering the same thing as someone else because he couldn't read the menu, being unable to find the aisle or the product he needed in a grocery store, having friends text for him, asking librarians to read him documents. Does that sound like freedom to you? No, it doesn't. The definition of freedom is the power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. What is more of a hindrance than lacking the language that will let you act, speak, and think as you want? But we're the inmates, right?
Yeah, speaking of inmates, I misplaced the exact video where Oliver discusses this, but on his page, he does tell us that he was incarcerated several years ago for, I believe, trafficking firearms, and talks about how part of the reason he was arrested is because he couldn't read and didn't know what he did was a crime. Even while being processed in jail, he couldn't understand his paperwork and didn't even know why he was there in the first place. For that reason, I think it's just so nasty to call people who are taught to read inmates when there's a strong connection between illiteracy and incarceration. Some studies show that 70% of incarcerated people can't read above a 4th grade level, and literate inmates had a 16% chance of returning to prison, whereas the illiterate inmates had a 70% chance, and that is huge, clearly. Yeah, so I bet your kid's gonna really appreciate these days of freedom when he's behind bars. Like, actually think about that for a second.
Just as important as the literal effects of illiteracy are the emotional effects. Here are some clips from Oliver's most viewed TikTok.
I'm sorry. I'm learning how to read, y'all. It's either this or I turn off the camera and just be angry and don't learn. Because regardless, this is why people give up. When you see an adult and they be like, why you never learn? Like, because this is what they would have to go through. I don't know if they'll go through it like me, but I'm going to tell you something. If you don't know how to read and you're an adult and you're going to start learning how to read, you will not get through this without any vulnerability, bro. Like, you don't. Ah! I'm supposed to know this! I'm supposed to know this shit already! Ah! Let's go! You learning, yo! You learning how to read! You learning! That's what it is! Let's go! Let's go! I'm supposed to know this stuff, yo. I'm supposed to already know how to read. I'm supposed to get this. Let's go!
So I am woman enough to admit that I cried watching this for the first time and second time. What's so affecting about Oliver's videos is just how open he is about the profound shame illiteracy has caused him. But so is the joy of finishing a new book or finally understanding a grocery aisle sign. Like I simply cannot fathom how any parent could come across his page, see his struggle, and think, yeah, I'll risk it. I will do nothing to prevent that from happening to my own child. For any hardcore unschoolers still watching this, do you really believe that Oliver was simply not ready to read until he was 34? Isn't it obvious that reading ability did not just naturally manifest in him and that he's clearly working hard to learn? Oliver was failed by the system. Because don't get me wrong, the school system can and does fail students. It is not perfect. But what makes you think that you and your child are immune to this? Oliver's teachers refused to teach him reading. You are your child's teacher. If you do not teach them to read, this is their future. If you can't tell, I really care about reading. Finally, I need to put out there that I have never been as genuinely proud of a total stranger as I am Oliver James. Teaching yourself to read as an adult is an incredible feat, and I applaud him for speaking publicly about an issue that is so highly stigmatized. I hope he's out there having a great day and reading everything his heart desires. I tried to come to this issue of unschooling with an open mind. Truth be told, I do have a little bit of sympathy for parents who are considering unschooling. I know from personal experience that the public school system is not the best fit for every child. As alluded to earlier, I switched from public to private school in high school because my social anxiety disorder was so severe that I refused to go back to public school, and doing so saved my education. I also think we do need to address the elephant in the classroom of gun violence in America. I'm filming this just 10 days after the school shooting in Georgia, which was the deadliest of 2024 so far, and there are no words to express the horror and the grief this crisis is causing that our administration refuses to do anything about. As a child-free person, I cannot imagine the terror of sending your children to school every day, not knowing if they're going to make it back. That is something absolutely no one should ever experience, and I do understand completely the impulse to remove your children from that environment. For these reasons, I don't think homeschooling in general is the worst thing. I do think it is possible for parents to know their children really well and to be highly engaged and structured in their education and making sure they progress as they should. What worries me is that if you're a parent whose child is struggling for whatever reason, or if you're justifiably terrified for your child's safety, and you come across someone like Kelsey Ray or Mommy Onami, and unschooling seems like this saving grace, like the answer, and you just might not realize that it comes with its own extreme risks and consequences. One of the glaring issues with the philosophy of unschooling is that you don't know what you don't know. How does a child know what they're interested in if they're not exposed to all the possibilities? Say maybe your kid has the potential to be the next Emily Dickinson or Whitman. But if you don't have poetry books around, how will they know they love poetry? Plus, most knowledge is cumulative. Say your child is super interested in American history. That's all well and good, but to really understand the founding of the US, for example, they're going to need to learn pretty much all of history prior to that point. But none of that can happen without literacy. There is a reason reading is taught first and foremost in schools. It underlines everything a person could need or want to know or do in this world. One of Oliver's TikToks that's been stuck in my mind is where he opens up about how reading has taught him just how much goes on in the world that he never knew before. And unfortunately, lots of it is awful. Reading the diary of Anne Frank for the first time and then discovering the Holocaust. But he also understands that ignorance is not really bliss. Ignorance of the world's complexities comes at the cost of being able to operate in it. What's ironic is that the unschooling parents of TikTok take literacy for granted, even though they themselves were taught to read. Literacy does not just naturally dawn on a person, so structure and education now means freedom later. And why wouldn't you choose that for your child? Well, goodness gracious, that is it for me today. Do let me know in the comments, have you heard of unschooling? Do you know anyone who's either practiced unschooling or been through it? Were you yourself unschooled? I would love to hear about your thoughts and experiences. Reminder, you can also follow me on Instagram, Threads, and Goodreads for fun, bookish extras and even more full-length reviews. If you enjoyed this video, I think you'll also enjoy this one. As always, thank you so very much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.